And people want to work for Apple. Well, why is that? Because they are very, very clear on their vision. I mean, think about 15 years ago, the whole Think Different marketing campaign that they had, right? People buy into that. The consumers buy into that and the employees buy in it. They want to be a part of that. And so everything they do is like a megaphone demonstrating who they are and what they're about. And they do that with their customer base, and they do that with their employees. And I think a hotel needs to do the same thing. What kind of a hotel do you want to be?
This is Hospitality One-to-One, conversations on the industry. Here's your host, Chris Bennis.
Today, we're joined by Jonathan Albano, host of LodgingLeaders.com podcast and co-creator of the BuildGreatHotelTeams.com training program. For more than 13 years, Jonathan defined membership services for AAHOA, one of the fastest-growing organizations in the hospitality industry, with more than 15,000 members owning more than 20,000 hotels, with a total of $128 billion in property value. In 2014, Jonathan left AAHOA and developed LodgingMetrics.com. It's a cloud-based dashboard that enables hotels to track critical business metrics across their entire portfolio in real time. In 2015, he launched the LodgingLeaders.com podcast, an interview-based show offering powerful business strategies for hospitality professionals. To date, Lodging Leaders has released over 130 interviews, totaling over 75,000 downloads. In 2016, Jonathan formed the HotelierMastermind.com, a virtual think tank of leading industry professionals to help identify the biggest challenges hoteliers face today. After surveying hundreds of hoteliers, the group discovered that finding and keeping quality associates was the number one challenge. In response, they developed BuildGreatHotelTeams.com, a comprehensive 11-module blended learning course designed to help hoteliers solve the staffing problem. He currently is providing consulting services to the hospitality industry. And now, Jon Albano. Jon, thanks so much for joining us today on the Hospitality One-to-One podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
So am I. You and I have had a chance to talk offline before, and every conversation has been spectacular. I'm looking forward to kind of talking more about you and the staffing industry.
Yeah, happy to do it.
So you've been doing the podcast now for a couple of years. You've interviewed well over 100 industry professionals. What do you think is the biggest challenge hoteliers are facing?
You know, if you ask a lot of hoteliers, probably what they're going to tell you is the oversaturation and the stiffer competition, smaller profit margins. But I went through a very in-depth process. I formed a mastermind group called the Hotelier Mastermind last year, and we went through a very intense survey process, and we discovered that the biggest challenge that all hotels are facing these days is around staffing. And it's not, it's the entire process of staffing. It's about where to find the A players. It's what questions to ask in the interview. It's the training. It's the onboarding, and of course the retention piece. And the way we did this, we actually it's pretty impressive. We pulled together a control group of quality management companies, and these are highly ranked top 100 management companies and a major international franchisor with 6 different brands. So our control group represented about 1,200 properties internationally, and through them we surveyed their member properties and all the people that we interviewed and that we interact with on a daily basis. And so probably 500 people gave us their feedback, and it was interesting because we asked them. It was open-ended questions. We had no real agenda other than uncovering a problem that we could solve through education. So they could have said that brands were their biggest problem. It could have been their management company. It could have been the government or taxes or federal government or compliance issues, safety and security, all the way down. And everyone came back with staffing.
So as you've done the podcast, I'm sure it's evolved from when you first got in front of the microphone till today.
Yeah.
What do you feel? I mean, how does your podcast now benefit hoteliers now that you've had a chance to kind of work through the kinks, if you will, and really give it its own identity?
Well, I like to think that the podcast is really helping people kind of stay up to date in the industry. If you've been in the hospitality industry for a while, you know that there are tons of industry publications. It's great information. A lot of times they're returning the same stories, in different publications. But people don't have a lot of time to sit down and read these articles. And I think a podcast is a great way. It's a very intimate setting, and it's a great way to kind of stay up to date. But you could do it while you're on the treadmill or while you're driving to work or maybe getting a little exercise on a break, that kind of thing. And so what I try to do is to showcase the rock stars in the industries and give people an opportunity to get to know the people and what their wisdom, their experience that they've gained through their years of experience in the industry, and to share that so they can be more relevant, they can stay up to date, and they can do it in a way that's a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more intimate, and less, sitting down with a magazine on a coffee break kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's fun.
Well, the other thing I would just want to say is I also think, look, I think in general, people have this imposter syndrome that pops up, right? And a lot of times we feel alone. So you're running a hotel and you're struggling and you're trying everything you can to move the needle, and all of your best efforts are failing. And, but you can feel very alone in that, like you're in a silo in that kind of a position because you don't know how to fix that problem. And when you learn from other people that have had those same problems, you hear your story from someone else, I think there's a huge amount of value because you realize, hey, we're not alone in this. I'm not the only one that's pulling my hair out trying to solve the staffing issue or trying to get my ADR up or get my occupancy up or whatever the case may be. They feel less alone. They feel more a part of, and then hopefully I'm giving them the tools that they need to be better at what they're doing.
That's terrific. Now, what made you decide to use the podcast as your vehicle? I mean, there's so many different options out there. There's blogs, there's websites, there's all kinds of things. What was the reason why you chose to go with a podcast?
Great question. Okay, so I went to a business mastermind with my friend Gene Hammett. He was my business coach for a couple of years, and I went to a mastermind. And I thought, because I have to back up a little bit if you don't mind. When I left AHOA back in 2014, I built a software as a service product called Lodging Metrics, and it was basically a dashboard to track critical business metrics in real time. And I built that because I went through an idea extraction process. I interviewed hundreds of people to find out what problems they were facing that a technology solution could solve, right? So I built the Lodging Metrics dashboard, and it worked out really great, but I got really tired of doing the outbound sales efforts, with email marketing and Google ads and Facebook ads and things like that. And I wanted to build authority in the industry. So I went to this mastermind with Gene Hammett, and I was thinking my job was going to be to learn how to do really amazing webinars, because I had heard that webinars are a great way to convert for a software product. And after going into this mastermind and talking to the different people, they were like, look, John, the best way you can do this is a podcast. And you don't even have to be the expert. You just have to find the experts and ask the right questions and create the space for them. And by association, people automatically see you as the expert because, you've been learning from the best of the best. And so I did the podcast, and I was terrified when I committed to doing that. This is in February, and I launched in April, so 2 months later. I was terrified. In my first maybe 5 to 10 interviews, I was sweating like crazy. I even went back and re-recorded different parts of the podcast because my ego was so out of check, because I thought it was all about me, and it wasn't about me. When I finally learned it was about my guest, and people don't really care what I had to say as much as they did this industry expert. When I let that go and just trusted in the process, I had fun with it, and it has been so rewarding. I mean, I get to talk to rock stars in the industry every single day, and learn from them, and learn from what their mistakes are, and I get to feel like less of an imposter myself because I feel like I'm not alone in this as well. Does it make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense. There's nothing more humbling than sitting behind a microphone.
Yes. Yeah. And also, when you're doing a podcast and because it's not live, it's not like you can look out in the audience and you see smiles and people nodding their heads. I'm talking into a microphone looking at a computer screen. Right. So I don't know if my message is actually resonating with people. And because of the medium, people have to go out of their way to actually give you feedback. They have to respond to one of your social media posts, or they have to send you an email or do something. They have to take some action. And so you don't get a lot of feedback feedback. So you're kind of in this vacuum, and one of your only metrics of your success is your downloads. How many people are actually downloading the podcast? Is it growing? Where, and for me, it's been really exciting to watch it grow month over month. Every month I've been growing, and to know that I'm in well over 100 countries around the world, 140 countries around the world, and that 25% of my listeners are outside of the United States. That's exciting to me.
It's just amazing the reach you can have. Now, I guess if we could bring it back into the staffing realm.
Yeah.
We had talked about one of the biggest challenges being faced was staffing from the hotel standpoint. Why do you think that is? What part of staffing is challenging?
All of it. I always equate staffing to like a three-legged stool, right? So with a three-legged stool, if one of those legs fails, you're going down. All right. Point being, it's just done. And that's the way staffing is. And I think so many people get it right in some of the areas and they totally miss the mark in others. So for example, when we went through the Build Great Hotel Teams course, in our mastermind group, we had HR executives from top 100 management companies. These are rock stars. They might have 40, 50 hotels in their portfolio. And so we were able to identify all the different pieces, and it's everything from the very beginning. It's your mindset and culture. So what kind of a hotel do you want to be? What kind of a product do you want to put out there? Why are you doing what you're doing? If you're not clear on that, then how are you going to get your team rallied behind you on that? Then module 2 was our first step in recruiting. So the reason why we talked about that is getting super clear on who your ideal candidate is. I mean, how are you going to know when you're interviewing an ideal candidate if you don't know what the ideal candidate is? What are the characteristics? What's the personality traits? What are you looking for in a candidate before you actually post that job description? Then the selection process in recruiting. So how to find your A team fast? How do you whittle through the 500 resumes that you just got from monster.com or whatever it is? Effective interviewing. So one of the biggest challenges that people have and the biggest fears is interviewing. People don't know how to interview. We all know, or most people know, that there are HR laws that can get you if you ask an inappropriate question. Like, I can ask you what your job duties were in your prior job. I can't ask you if you're married or if you plan to have kids or if you have a terminal disease or whatever. There are all kinds of things that people might think that they might want to ask. Or do you have any health challenges that would prevent you from doing that job? That is a question you can't ask. There's a way you could ask that to get that information, but you can't ask it in that way. And so people get overwhelmed by that. And if you step back, Chris, and you think about it, when you, when you're growing up, when you're going through high school or through college, nobody takes a job on interviewing. We don't learn how to do this. So what are we doing? We're probably parroting back things that people did in interviews that we've had for prior jobs. And just because it was your boss doesn't mean that they know how to interview. The chances are they didn't read a book on it either. And so you're probably repeating bad habits from less skilled interviewers, and then you're doing that same thing. So you got to remember that interviewing is often as awkward for you as the interviewer as it is for the candidate. But it's asking those right questions to make sure that you're identifying. You're getting to the truth. It's not just happy talk, right? You're really finding out what you need to know about that person. So now let's assume that you've identified this A player. You make a job offer, they accept. The welcome is another big place where people drop the ball. I have talked to so many people that work for great hotels, great brands, great organizations, great management companies, and they tell me that their onboarding or their training process was literally, there's the computer, this is how you check in a guest, go. And that's it. So there's no onboarding. They don't have an opportunity to get acclimated with your mission, your vision, introduce them to different parts of the organization itself, as are the different departments and what the different jobs are. So the onboarding also is the detail stuff. It's the W-2 form that they have to fill out and make sure that their direct deposit is taken care of. So when the first pay cycle comes around, they actually get paid. People like to get paid for the work that they're doing, right? These are things that people drop the ball on. But then I mentioned the initial training, but then there's also ongoing and reinforced training. So you want to continue to develop your team. What is one of the complaints that people have when they feel like they're not engaged at their job? It's because they don't feel like the company really invested in them. So are you training them? Are you making sure that they have the skills they need to succeed? And let me be clear on this. And I know I'm rambling. I apologize for that. But with the skills on that, it's not a gotcha game. It's not like I want to find all the things that Chris is doing wrong. I want Chris to be a rock star. And if he knows 80% of the job but is missing that 20%, let me find out what that 20% is and help you do that 20% very well. So now you're a rock star showing up with 100% all the time. So, really, really training the team properly.
Yeah, these are fantastic points. In fact, you were talking about the onboarding process. Made me think one of the most dangerous times in the employment cycle. So after you've had the interviews, the reference checks, the background checks, and now an offer has been extended. You've reviewed the offer letter and you signed the offer letter. Now comes that truly dangerous time period, because now you have this window from when the candidate has accepted the offer. They now are required to go to their current employer. This is primarily if they're working now, of course. They have to go to their current employer. They have to give notice. And now you've got this 2-week or more window where you need to stay in touch with them, because if you don't, that radio silence, if you will, could spell a counteroffer, could spell any number of things. So you're speaking about the onboarding process, I think, is absolutely essential.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're mentioning this, because that is a very true thing. I mean, look, if somebody's not going to give a 2-week notice at their current employer, what are they going to do to you? Right? It's like dating somebody. You start a relationship with an affair, right? Well, chances are they're going to have an affair on you, right? You gotta, how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? So you gotta, first of all, if they're doing that, the 2-week notice, that's respectable. And if they don't, that's a red flag for the kind of person that you're bringing on board. But stay in touch with them. I love that you mentioned that. But again, you want to treat them, you want them to feel that you're really excited to bring them on board. It's not just a body to fill a position. It's the right person. You're excited to have them, and you want to show them that. You want to prove it to them with your actions, not just your words.
And it's great that your focus has been on the staffing side of things as well for the hotels, because while every industry does have its share of turnover, in the hotel industry, it's particularly high. I mean, I believe it's around, actually over 70%.
Yeah.
So in comparison to other industries, why do you think that turnover is so high?
We keep on coming back to it, but I think it comes down to the training. So I think back to jobs that I've done in the past. When I feel like I know the job cold, I mean, I'm a rock star in this job, right? I don't want to leave that job. I love the job because I can go in there and I can show up and, I've got this skill and I can knock it out of the park and I can see smiles on people's faces. If people don't have the training to really succeed in that position, that's going to lead to disengagement. And so I think it's the ongoing training. And again, let's take a front desk agent, right? Some people might feel like a front desk job is a dead end job or a housekeeper job, but it doesn't have to be. If you actually have some conversations with them and you understand where they want to go, maybe they're a good writer. Well, maybe, you've got a social media site for your hotel. If they're a good writer, maybe they could do some social media posting for you. Maybe they could respond to some of your guest reviews. You're not going to know that if you don't have a conversation with them. So you want to engage, you want to interact with them and keep them engaged and learn as much as you can about them to really appreciate them and to find ways that you can support them. Another thing, and this is something I had someone share this in our hotelier mastermind, is if you have these connecting conversations with your team, and what I mean by a connecting conversation is not a review. This is not an annual review or a quarterly review. This is hey, let me get to know you, Chris. What makes you tick? Now that they're hired, it's not like an interviewing question, so you can find out if they're married. You can find out if they have kids. What if they have a kid that plays baseball and the practice starts at 5:00, but their job doesn't end till 5:30? So that parent is feeling like a piece of crap, right? Because they're missing their kid's baseball practice, or maybe the kid can't do baseball because they can't get out of work in time to do that. If you could shift that schedule by 1 hour so they can be there for their child, they're going to feel valued. They're going to feel like what was important to you was important to them. And so you're going to feel more engaged there. You're going to feel like a better parent. You're going to have a bigger, a bigger bounce to your step when you go to work the next day because you were there for your child. Those kinds of things don't take a lot of effort from a leadership perspective, but they mean everything to an employee.
You're talking about the little things, the human things that ironically really don't cost an employer anything more to let them come in a little bit earlier or leave a little bit earlier or shift their schedule or play off on their strengths. These are all things that really on paper don't cost anymore, but there is a cost associated with turnover. I mean, what?
Amen. Yes.
what does high turnover cost a hotel?
That's a great question. And we needed to discover that when we were building the course, right? We wanted to find out what the value is. Like, because a lot of people want to know what the ROI is, right? Why would I buy a course? What's in it for me? Well, you got to find out what the cost of the turnover is costing the hotel. And so Cornell, arguably the leading institution for hospitality education in the United States, they did a study and they discovered that the turnover cost for an $8 per hour employee can range anywhere from $5,600 to $11,600 per year, depending on your location. Now, if you replace 2 employees in that year, you're running $11,000 to $23,000. And again, 3 employees would be $17,000 to $35,000 in a year. So if you look at the turnover rate of 70%, on average, that means if you have 3 housekeepers, 2 of those guys are going to bounce in a year. So it just costs you $11,000 to $23,000 to bring those people on board. So that's the financial cost. And obviously you want to look at that. But besides that, what is this doing to your other staff? It's going to be draining your other staff. I mean, if you're down a housekeeper, they're cleaning extra rooms, so their days just got longer. If they're a lead housekeeper, maybe they're doing the training. So now that person is not only keeping up with their own workload, but they're training other people, and that can be very draining for them. And so what that can do to your other staff is it can be like this vicious cycle. It's a downward cycle where the churn can lead to additional churn because you're burning out the people. Even the housekeeper that was a rock star is now a deadbeat because they're just done with the turnover cycle in your property.
You talk about the turnover. We've often talk about here on the podcast the idea of the employer brand.
Yes.
I would imagine that the high turnover as well. I mean, people can see that. They do their research. They know what's going on. If they see a high number of employees from ABC Hotel are now up on the job boards or work there and are no longer, that can be damaging to your employer brand too.
Absolutely. I mean, the relationship that you have or the perception that you have or the brand that you have with your team is absolutely critical. Look at Apple, right? I mean, I know I was one of those fools that waited outside to get one of the new iPhones that came out, right? And, there are probably millions of people across the country that have done that have been inconvenienced to buy an Apple product. And people want to work for Apple. Well, why is that? Because they are very, very clear on their vision. I mean, think about 15 years ago, the whole Think Different marketing campaign that they had, right? People buy into that. The consumers buy into that and the employees buy in it. They want to be a part of that. And so everything they do is like a megaphone demonstrating who they are and what they're about. And they do that with their customer base, and they do that with their employees. And I think a hotel needs to do the same thing. What kind of a hotel do you want to be? Do you want to be really involved in the community? Do you want to give back in the community? Do you want to host benefits and provide a place where people can make connections with each other and network and grow? So what are you trying to? How do you want to give back as a community? What kind of an employer do you want to be for your team? And what kind of an experience do you want to give to your guests? It's all of that they have to be looking at.
And engagement and working with your teams is so important. I think back to when you're trying to improve your brand from an employer standpoint, and you're trying to better hire, it's a two-way street. You almost need to talk to your current employees and talk to your current team that way. And at times that crickets, if you will, is a real concern. So what do you recommend for higher engagement from your teams?
Another great question. I would say probably the number one thing you could do is having connecting conversations. And again, these are I call it a drive-by conversation, but it's like you walk by the cubicle and you ask somebody how they're doing, or the front desk, and you ask somebody how they're doing. You stop. Everybody has a lunch break, right? Well, why don't you, on at least a quarterly basis, have lunch with each of your team, or maybe a bagel with them, or a cup of coffee with them, and just kind of talk to them and find out what's, going back to what I was talking about before. Is there a barrier that is helping, that's preventing them from being the rock star that you want them to be at their job? Asking them direct questions like, what do you love about the job? What don't you like about the job? And don't worry about it. I'm not going to fire you. I just want to know what parts of the job you don't like doing. But what are you passionate about? What did you go to school for? Or whatever this is. If you find these things out, you can probably help them have a better work and experience, feel like they're adding value. They're building their resume. So, if they're with you for 2 years or 20 years, they're adding to their value. They're able to contribute more and you're getting more out of them. So everybody wins in that scenario. But so that's a connecting conversation. And again, that is not a formal sit down and performance review where I'm trying to find things doing wrong. I wanted to get to know you as a person. Stay interviews is another thing. That's a little bit more formal, but it's the same kind of a concept. But you've been here for a while and I want to find out what's working for you, what's not working for you. If somebody leaves, especially a rock star, if somebody leaves, definitely do an exit interview. Find out why they left. Was it money? Was it they were relocating? Was it, hospitality was a stepping stone and they just got their degree and now they want to go into their career of choice or whatever, you want to know, because if it's something wrong, you can fix it. It's just like a guest review on TripAdvisor, right? You could take that feedback and you can either get angry about it and get resentful, or you can embrace that feedback and correct it so you can create a better experience moving forward. You want to do the same thing for your employees as you want to do for your guests.
That's fantastic. Now, you have been in a really unique situation because of the number of hoteliers you've talked to and had a chance to interact with on a regular basis. You may be able to speak to this with some expertise. What do you think are some of the common mistakes leaders make when it comes to staffing?
I think the first mistake is a lot of people get into a panic mode. Somebody quits without notice and they fill a position because they're in a bind versus hiring an A player. I think it's much better to hold out for that A player. It's the whole hire slow, fire fast kind of thing. Get really, really clear. Do your due diligence. Do your interviews. Do your reference checks and background checks before you extend that offer for any position. I'm not talking just an executive level position. Any position you want to know, if a housekeeper has 5 jobs in the last year, for example, it's a pretty big red flag that they're going to bounce on you in the next couple of months. So I wouldn't even entertain that. But so you have to do your due diligence to ensure that you're getting the A player. I think also, we talked about this already, but inadequate onboarding and training, the connecting with your team, really take the time. And I have to admit, Chris, I've been guilty of this. Especially when I got to the VP position at AHOA, I was so overwhelmed. I felt like I was failing in every area of my life, in my marriage, with my kids, in my job, because I was just so completely overwhelmed. But shame on me for being in that position, right? Which is my next point, which is about delegation, right? If I was better at delegating and empowering my employees, I would have had more free time. They would have felt better about their job, and I would have felt better about mine. So taking the time to really delegate to and empower your employees. If they do something, find an excuse to catch them doing something right, not something wrong, and really build them up.
That's great stuff. You were talking before about the training, about the onboarding, about feedback from your current employees. But of course, when we walk it back and look at finding that employee, finding that person who we want to bring on board, maybe put some skin in that if we can. Where should people look for good candidates?
Okay, so I read this book called Who, The A Method for Hiring, and it's by a guy named Jeff Smart. And I interviewed him on the podcast last year. Phenomenal guy. And he went through and surveyed Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, the senior executives. And what he learned is the number one way to hire A candidates is referrals. Referrals from your staff, referrals from your vendors, the people that you do business with, and your business network. And oftentimes offering some kind of an incentive. So if a staff member refers another another hire and they stay on for 3 months or longer, giving them a bonus or some kind of an incentive. So they feel valued for making that referral. And again, this is usually a person's not going to put their neck on the line for another person unless they really respect their work product. So referrals are a great way to do it. Staffing agencies, especially for executive executive roles are phenomenal because you got to think about it. Who's doing the hiring at a hotel? Usually the general manager. They have a million things on their plate. Do they have time to read through 500 resumes and conduct 20 interviews to go through this process? A staffing agency is a great way to whittle through that, to cull that list and get it down to some of the best employees that you can look at. And you can still do your own due diligence above and beyond what the staff agency is doing for you. But I think a staffing agency is great. But another thing is thinking outside the box, right? So a lot of times people want to hire other hotel folks, right? Well, if you're trying to come up with a front desk agent, you're trying to fill the slot, that's a customer service position. There might be another company in town that has a customer service department with great customer service. I mean, shoot, Brewster's Ice Cream is great customer service here in Atlanta, or Chick-fil-A. One of those people would be fantastic working at a front desk if they're really good, social skills, that kind of thing. So thinking outside the box a little bit, but then also matching the position with the source. So if you're trying to hire an IT manager, probably don't want to go to monster.com or hot jobs. You might want to go to Dice because Dice is where the IT managers tend to post their jobs. If you're trying to get an event planner, maybe you have a meeting space, a trade association might have a great event planner that you could hire. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the hospitality space to find a great person. So, I think it's really important to get clear on the job, what the ideal candidate for that position, and then what that actual position entails, and then where that position is best suited to find them. So, if it's an online job board or it's a trade association or other organization, even a local church, things like that, there are lots of ways that you can find amazing people out there. It's not just, putting an ad in the classifieds like they used to do,
What fantastic advice. Just great advice, Jon. Thank you so much. As we wrap up, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, I'd love to get people over to the podcast. So that is lodgingleaders.com is the website on that. And my email is john@lodgingleaders.com. But I'm also active on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So LinkedIn would be Jonathan Albano. Facebook is Jono Albano. And Twitter is Jon_Albano.
That's great. And of course, we're going to put a link to everything Jon's talked about on the hospitality1to1.com website. Jon, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Well, Chris, this has been really enjoyable. I mean, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about this topic. I spent my entire year last year learning everything I could about staffing, specifically for the hospitality industry. And the fact that you are trying to move the needle in that way, and you're really trying to help the corporate branding, the brand that the property has with their employees, I think it's such a critical piece. I love that you're doing that, and just happy to share my experience with your listeners.
Hey, thanks, Jon. Have a great day.
You too, Chris. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. We're also available at facebook.com/hospitality1to1. That's hospitality, the number 1, number 2, and number 1. We're also on Twitter at hospitality1to1 and www.hospitality1to1.com.